Hello, welcome to Parsons Communication Design Lecture Series for the spring 2023. My name is Roon Kang, Associate Director of the program. And as you know, CD Lecture Series is a place for CD students to meet design thinkers and practitioners within the discipline and in the adjacent fields. And this semester, we're spending time with the designers within our community. After today's talk, we have a synoptic office, which is Casper Lam and Eugene Park, scheduled in 2 weeks. And after that, we have Kelly Walters, so stay tuned. The lecture series takes place in every 2 weeks on Fridays, 3 p.m. Eastern Time throughout the semester. And you can find out more about upcoming lectures from our CD app and watch the past lectures from our YouTube channel. Today's speaker is 908A, which is actually myself and Andrew LeClair, and I'll introduce ourselves here. So 908A is a research initiative by Roon Kang and Andrew LeClair that focuses on constructing new design tools in partnership with cultural organizations. Building on work for clients such as Google, MIT Architecture, and RISD Museum, alongside teaching at Parsons, RISD, Triple Canopy, and other places, 908A aims to build an intellectual framework and a community around the practice of design as the shaping of instructions rather than manual composition of surfaces. And with that, we'll jump right into the presentation. Let me share my screen. Second. Go. All right.
So our name 908A actually comes from the studio space that Roon and I were sharing for many years, and we were having all of these kind of conversations about design and the relationship between technology and the way we were practicing design. And we realized that we had a lot of shared interests and shared approaches. And so we decided to turn that ongoing conversation into a place for us to actually make projects and to push that forward. And we thought that, for this talk, it would be interesting to actually take one of our projects and really focus on it more deeply. This is 110-100, which is a book that we designed for the communication design program here at Parsons. And so we'd like to kind of invite in a little bit to that conversation that we've been having and talk about some of the thinking behind the project and some of the technologies that we used, and then the life that project has had after it's been finished. And so I think, Roon, it might be useful to kind of start by just giving some context, like how did we start this project, and how did we, what were the constraints that we were kind of working with at the beginning?
Sure. Yeah, so the communication design program at Parsons has a really long tradition of creating a printed catalog every year, going back to 2013. We've been making these books in lieu of doing an end of year exhibitions, because we believe this is a better choice for the given resources and the specific context that our program kind of sits in. And one big benefit of creating a physical catalog is that the books kind of stay, whereas the exhibitions kind of disappear once they're done. And over the past decade, we kind of found these books in all kinds of different places, from the bookshelf of various design studios in the city and companies, and around the campus in other schools, even though we kind of only distributed a limited copies of each year. And this publication has been a really wonderful tool for the program to showcase amazing student work that came out each year, and also served as a sort of a great self-promotional tool for the students. And the year 2021 came to be, and it was when the new school is celebrating its 100 years history, and it also happened to be the year that it's been 10 years since Parsons Communication Design has switched over to the new curriculum. and which is the curriculum that most of you in the audience are familiar with, the sequence from the core interaction to the core type to the senior thesis, which we're still very much proud of. And an idea was floated around among faculty that we should commemorate this special moment, and to do that by creating a special edition of our annual thesis publication. So for this occasion, we wanted to add more content to the book. The essays and the other things, the section that's marked as black on the diagram on your left. So the book would be physically thicker. And we also wanted to expand the viewership. Up until this point, the publications were only distributed to the immediate community, the students and the faculty, more or less, and a few small copies to alums and to other folks at Parsons. And this year, we wanted the book to be more widely distributed, and meaning that we wanted the book to reach the industry professionals in the city and along with our global audience. And we wanted to find ways to do that, but also within our limited amount of resources. So this is one very important context to the book. And another important context, was that there are these existing processes around this thesis publication. Back in those days, students were uploading their final work to the Google Drive, and then we, meaning the faculty, gather together and edit the text, the project descriptions, and sort through them and upload the data to the BFACD website, the bfacd.parsons.edu, which is another way we showcase our student work. And we also use the same Google Drive data to design and make the publication. This work has been done by the amazing design studio Common Name. And we, the program, were working closely with Common Name to produce the publication. And the biggest challenge during this was kind of always the timeline. Students were submitting their thesis work around April 1st. And the students are generally graduating around May 15th or so. We wanted the book to be at the students' hands by then, by the time when they graduate, because otherwise students kind of go back to their home, sometimes go back to their home country. And the offset printing process for the book usually takes about a month, including the shipping. So realistically, we have about 2 weeks in early in April. And within these 2 weeks, we needed to edit and finalize the content, design the book, and make it print ready and send it to the printer. We, again, the faculty at our communication design program, kind of find ourselves in a situation where we need to think kind of creatively to arrive at our goal, to make a bigger volume, special edition thesis catalog within given context and constraints. We had many conversations around this, but one particular thing kind of clicked, and that was something that we, as in 908A, had some previous experiences in. And we thought these thesis catalogs, when you think about it, it's mostly a list of student works. So thinking about it as a database for a second, it's actually really simple. A student brings a name, project title, and description, and 5 images along with them. And we have 150 or so copies of this structure. So instead of manually designing these 150 pages for 2 weeks, we can probably find other ways to do this, was our thesis. And our attention turned to websites. And this is the back end of the BFACD, Parsons.edu. And as you can see, each project has these data fields to be populated, and each set of these fields make up a new page, basically. So if you have more projects, you can create a new page from this backend and populate it with the data. Then you have a new page, just like how people create blogs and write blog articles. And this is exactly why people use content management systems like WordPress, Squarespace, Wix, because it provides a way to templatize sections of your site and continue adding new pieces of content as long as it meets the sort of the predefined content structure. And for BFACD website, we were using a CMS called Kirby. And up until this point, we were manually translating students' Google Drive submissions to this flat file database that can be picked up by Kirby. So this got us thinking, actually, can we leverage this existing Kirby infrastructure and build something around it to make it more efficient and eventually also create a book along with the website? In other words, can this CMS create a book instead of a website, was the question. And we started sketching out the entire workflow, sort of an ecosystem of data, if you will. So in our newly imagined process, there would be a specialized submission form that students use to submit their work in a more kind of a structured manner than Google Drive, which directly writes to the database in the exact format that can be picked up by the Kirby CMS. Then with HTML and CSS template, it would create a website as it usually does. But in this new flow, we were thinking maybe we can create another set of templates, not just for web, but for print. And then perhaps we can create a print-ready PDF out of it. And this new workflow kind of seemed feasible to us. And the only missing piece was that part with a question mark in it. We had some previous experiences in this, but for this exact purposes, we didn't know what to do exactly. And along with it was this question, like, is HTML and CSS robust enough to replace InDesign completely? Are we losing some fundamentals of typesetting and by doing the layout of the book entirely, just relying entirely on the HTML and CSS? So making a book from database using HTML and CSS templates mean that the content would exist in these kind of formats. What you see on the left is the simple text format called Markdown. And what's on the right is more of a structured data format called TSV, the tab separated values, for more kind of data heavy stuff. And we had this kind of content on top of student work, because again, this was our 10th anniversary special edition catalog. And after some research and making quick tests around these various tools, we landed on using a tool called Prints.xml, which is a software that can run using a command line to reliably translate HTML to PDF. It also had some nice extra features that we found important to the important addition to the standard set of HTML and CSS layout features. And we made some early tests to make sure that the tool is the right choice for us to replace InDesign essentially. So we completed our mental proof of concept with Kirby and Prince working together. We were relatively certain we can make this happen, but this was also something that we haven't done before. So we didn't fully understand what it takes to build this entire system. But we also needed to kind of move ahead, and with the program sign off, meaning Casper, the program director, giving a green light to this operation, we began designing the system that generates this book.
So one of the first questions that we had to answer was what the trim size of the book was going to be. And the trim size is often like a good decision to make really early in a book process, because so many other things like the typography often can be derived from the trim size. And we analyzed some of the previous books, and we saw that the books from 2019 to 2020 were kind of a larger size. They were 9x12. And then before that, there was actually some precedent from 2013 to 2018 of a smaller book that was like 6x9. And so we started to explore different sizes, and we ended up, we arrived at like a 6.5 by 9.5 trim size, which was nice and appealing on a couple of levels, because it was, because it was intermediate of the previous catalogs, but also provided some economy when we were printing. You could print 16 pages on one form on the press really efficiently. So we were interested in that. And I think also having a slightly smaller trim size, because we had a proof of concept, but we were embarking on this completely new way of making a book. sort of felt like a little bit safer, that like we were dealing with like a smaller page size. So it felt a little more manageable. And once we had that trim size, we were able to then start calculating the page counts of the book and start to figure out, what is the shape of this volume. And we knew that there was going to be around 170 pages dedicated to the student work, just based on the number of students who are graduating. But as Roon mentioned, we were also adding a lot of additional content. We were adding transcripts of lectures that had taken place at Parsons. We were also adding some additional framing essays and interviews. And so we started mapping out this kind of structure of pages of the book. And around this time, we started to think that we might want to use multiple paper stocks so that we could create a differentiation between the student work, which we envisioned we could print on a sort of glossy paper in full color, and then the other material, which we could print on an uncoated stock in black plus a spot color. And that would also allow us to kind of get the maximum number of pages within our printing budget, so that we could have more pages of kind of framing material without having to spend the money for color throughout.
And while we're making these kind of important early design decisions, it was also in the middle of the pandemic during 2021, and we were pretty much using pretty much all of the major collaboration platform that is out there to be kind of stay in sync. Design and ideation was mainly done in Figma. Content were first written in Google Docs and Google Sheets, and the files were synced using Dropbox. Messages are being sent through Slack and email, and the meetings were in Zoom and FaceTime. The whole landscape was crazy and kind of continues to be crazy to this date, but the project somehow lived in between these tools. And a big challenge in being in sync was also the time difference. The editor of the book, Casper and Jared, along with Andrew, the designer, were in New York City. And I temporarily relocated to Honolulu with my family during COVID. And our printer was located in Vancouver. So there was a slight window of 3 hours or so to have everyone in a same meeting. But over time, we learned ways to use the difference in time to our own benefit. While one of us was sleeping, the other person can work and pass the baton when they're done. So the work can continue with sort of a minimal amount of synchronous meetings. But doing everything remotely meant really everything needed to be remote. So eventually, we kind of found ourselves sending each other emails like this, comparing kind of different sheen of paper by taking photo of those papers from iPhone and looking through that from our own computer monitors, which is of course not ideal, but somehow needed to happen. So this is an example of an email that was sent to us from our printer asking us to make decisions about the paper that we will be using. And there was no way to get the sample papers from them on time, right at that moment, as the USPS and the FedEx either paused service or there were significant delays during the pandemic. So this was pretty much the only option that we could rely on.
And I mean, I think even though it was challenging at times, I think there was also something that was exciting to us about making a book this way. We wrote about this a little bit in our text that we put at the end of the book, talking about the process. The fact that, it was able to be kind of made collaboratively, where we're all working on different parts. So we wrote, content is managed through a flat file CMS. Kirby Jarrett Fuller wrote and edited the text directly using the human readable markup language Markdown. Casper Lamb organized data about the program in tables that are stored in a structured text format, TSV. Andrew and Roon designed browser-based templates using HTML and CSS that gave form to the content as it was written. And the entire website exists as a constantly updated preview on a website, which can be used to generate a PDF on demand using a renderer prints. So I think that this feeling of a book that is kind of constantly shifting and constantly updating felt very exciting. Like it's something that we can do with this tool that we're using. What you're seeing here is actually the web preview of the book. So every time the content was updated, you could refresh this page and you would see the book change. And because it's presented on a website, on the left, you can see the table of contents, and on the right, you see a flowing column, which is all of the content of the book. And then when this gets rendered into the PDF, that long single column gets split up into separate pages, which then creates the actual pages of the book. And at the same time, we were constantly generating outputs. So we actually wrote a command so that every time we output a copy of the book, it would stamp it with the current date and time so that we could see this kind of record of every single version of the book, every iteration that we were generating. And so, constantly outputting the book and checking it to see how it was looking as we were working. And we have this, just some examples of like the record of all the PDFs that we produced.
Yeah, so we were kind of gradually building the system, and we were at a point that we had everything in the system content-wise and ready to take the student submission for their thesis work. We wrote a little guide for students in Notion to explain in detail how to submit their work. And we also designed a special form for the actual submission of the data. And the deadline came. The students were slowly, the student work was slowly being submitted. And it was actually kind of really satisfying on our end to see the content kind of piling up. And once the submission was done, we generated the final PDF using prints, and that was sent to our printer in Vancouver, who took a month to print 800 copies of the book. And there goes a month.
And then a month later, a book shows up and we can hold it in our hands. And this is what the book looks like. We divided the book into 3 sections, 3 chapters, the 1, 10, and 100 of the title. The 1 was looking at the student work from the past year. The 10 was a retrospective of the last 10 years of the Parsons communication design curriculum. And the 100 was looking at kind of the broader history of the institution. And so, each of those was given a kind of visual treatment, which we then embossed a representation of on the cover. And, the embossing was actually, an interesting production challenge because one of the sections was rendered as a gradient, which I think we have a visual of, Roon, like a smooth gradient, which we then had to somehow convert into something that could actually be printed on a plate so that then it could be embossed. And so we explored like different densities of dithering that would allow, that gradient to be actually embossed. And in the book, the embossing creates this nice detail in the flaps where, because the embossing presses through the paper, if you open the flaps of the book, you can actually, on the reverse side, we used those imprints to annotate specific details about the content that's in the book. So for example, within each section, identifying the number of images, the number of words, the number of rows of data that went in as input into each of those sections. And this is one of the text spreads. So this is a panel discussion that we transcribed. And you can see that in the running text, we introduced this visual treatment that indicated which of the chapters you were in. In this case, it was a series of these rounded ovals that would annotate each of the elements on the page. And remember, this is HTML and CSS, so each of those chunks of text is an HTML tag. And so we could use CSS to just draw this line around each of those HTML tags, and then that becomes a kind of visual constant underlying the entire section. Also, because we were printing this in to color, black plus a spot color, the images that we had to convert from full color to the book in order to kind of maximize what we could get with our two ink colors. We used a custom color profile from Color Library to convert the full color of the images to black plus a spot color. So it's a little different from a duotone, where the pink would have been applied to the entire image, but actually in this kind of system, the reddish areas of the image actually become translated to the spot color. And I think we have an image of that too, Roon. Yeah, so you can see how the image gets translated from full color into black plus a spot color. And then, the circles carried through throughout the text section. And so, we were interested in the way that this was like a very simple graphic gesture, which would have been really difficult and time consuming to do in a traditional design tool. But because we're building this essentially as like a website, it was really easy to set up this rule and then let's see how it played out. And it's kind of interesting to see how it responds and adapts to the content as the content changes. The student work, as I mentioned, was printed on a glossy stock in full color. And because the aspect ratios of the images that the students were uploading varied, the page template would also adapt so that it would find, like a good layout for those images. And so, that would carry through that entire section.
And another significant portion of the book was the section we call data traces. This is a collection of data points that we could gather about the 100 years and the 10 years and the 1 year of the history of the program. And these data points were not kind of meant to be comprehensive or representational, but more something that we could find almost like a breadcrumb, with the hope that like they reveal something when presented visually. And these include sort of course information, student information, faculty who has been teaching in the program in the past 10 years, etc., which you can see on this spread. And the content for this data primarily lives on Google Spreadsheets. Originates from Google Spreadsheets. And we exported the sheets into TSVs, I mentioned earlier, to programmatically compose this page. So this is a detailed view. As you can see, creating these kind of intricate details is something the computer programs are kind of good at. And I'm actually really happy that we laid out the book in this way. And in this particular kind of table/chart thing, I guess, each row is a faculty member and each cell represents a semester. A white box means that they taught in that particular semester. This is an example of another page that shows the student nationalities, which country was represented in which semester, again in a similar format with faculty, and the list of languages spoken in the program in aggregate on the right-hand side. And what's on the right-hand side page is a chart showing how the student population has grown within that 10 years.
After the book is done, it continues to have this life outside of the physical book. So it's interesting to watch like a book project kind of make its way through the various networks and systems that are that it moves through. So to watch like the book go on to Amazon as a JPEG and to see how a book looks in this context is really interesting. You have surprisingly little control over the JPEG that appears in Amazon. And then also to see how the photos that we took of the book, kind of move and migrate across different platforms. So, to see it move across Instagram or, through press, or, to discover the book in a bookstore in Korea, it's really interesting to kind of watch this life that the book has. And also like thinking about how the book the book's metadata exists in various other kinds of databases. So like WorldCat, to see the book as it exists in libraries and becomes kind of archived in a certain way. We can see which libraries have like acquired the book and where it's moving.
Yeah, so that was our 2021 the special edition book. And the year 2022 came by last year, and we, the faculty, kind of sat down again to figure out what we're going to do for the subsequent volumes. And after a few rounds of conversations, we decided to give these publications a name. And we chose Framework as the name of the publication, and start with Framework 101, because the last issue was celebrating 100 years. So this one is going to be the 101. So it would start from 101, then 102, and 103, and so on. So we continue to create these publications in this series.
I think because we had a new title, it made sense to think about a different cover. And so one of the big changes that we made, even though we brought over the majority of the book system to the framework from 110, 100, was to redesign the way that the cover looks. And so we ended up with this system where the word framework appears on the back cover along with the number. And then on the front cover, it actually, the system actually reads through all of the content and identifies each person who contributed in some way, and then pulls out their last name and then places it on the cover with this little symbol. And then that becomes a kind of, nod to the fact that this book is collectively authored. And the spine is where the table of contents, version of the table of contents lives. And so, whereas the first book was black plus a kind of pink spot color, for this book, we used black plus a gold, and then that becomes kind of a system that can keep, developing with subsequent books. Also, this pattern of shapes, which was mirrored onto the back cover, was printed with a silver foil. So, trying to show a little bit of the materiality here. It's really reflective and has kind of an interesting, creates like a very interesting visual texture when you hold it in your hand. And then moving into the book, the majority of the book work very similarly, like again, 80 to 90% of the same system. The images were filtered now with a new profile for black plus spot colored gold, which is like a metallic gold. The typography stayed mostly the same, but changed a little bit. We also added a completely new section. So there's a lot of great type design classes that are happening at Parsons. And so we asked some of the instructors to pull in some of that student work. And then we worked to make this section that could host these specimens from different student work in type design. And then we also added the capability to feature a project by adding a full bleed page or a full bleed spread, which would then like allow us to have one of the images like appear a little bit larger. And then that became, something to kind of like feature some student work a little bit more in the student work section. And, the other exciting thing that we did with Framework was we partnered with Drawdown, who, has been like a great partner and is handling distribution and is kind of like spreading the word about the book. And so that's kind of an ongoing collaboration that we have with them.
Which brings us to 2023. So this year will be Framework 102, which will be showcasing the work of this year's graduating seniors. And we're planning to keep the same format, but with a variation in color and the shape on the cover. And I am happy to report that the work submission is taking place as we speak today. Today is the deadline. So if you're a senior watching this talk, please finalize your submission. Thank you so much for participating in this.
So to close our talk, we wanted to take a step back and read a little bit from the text that we wrote about the project a little bit more. I think, this project represents a lot of what we're interested in and kind of how we think and approach things as a designer. We wrote, a book is the product of an intricate patchwork of systems. For example, a font with its embedded metrics and variable font axes, an algorithm which calculates the arrangement of words in the lines of a paragraph, and a layout which defines the placement of text and images on a page. Each of these systems is a product of design. Each was created with specific intentions in a particular historical and cultural context, and carries with it inherent associations and biases.
So as 908A, we propose that as communication designers, we should focus beyond the superficial appearance of things toward these underlying systems. We should investigate our relationship to technology and make choices that benefit us, our collaborators, and the world. In this mode of practice, we build new tools and share them, combine existing systems in new ways, and use tools to expose their embedded assumptions. This practice draws our collective critical attention to the technologies around us, challenging dominant narratives and presenting the possible alternatives. So with that, that is the presentation we prepared.